In part 1, we created a SharePoint list to catalog all of the data connectors. In part 2, we have set up a list to document all flows and their associated connectors. In this video, we'll establish a list for Power Apps and their identified connectors. If you would like to follow along, please feel free to download the solution to your environment in the description below. Let's get started. The first thing you need to do before fetching Power Apps is to create a SharePoint list to store the details. And then go ahead and open up the solution. Go to Environment Variables and then select Get Data Connector Site. Just ensure this site collection is the same site collection where you have created the data connector list. And then navigate to the Cloud Flows. Open up the Create SBO List flow and then go to Create Apps List scope. If you wish to rename the app list, you can do so in this Compose action and list name -apps. I recommend choosing a name without any spaces or special characters for a cleaner internal name. I just put a terminate right underneath and then we can test it. After the flow has ran successfully, and then we are going to go to the site collection just to make sure it's created. And there we have it. We have apps-demo. And then we are going to create a new lookup column for the connectors. Look up to the data connector list. And then make sure you click more options and scroll down to allow multiple selections. And then click yes. After the list is completed, then we are going to go back to the solution, select the environment variables, and then open the apps list, then select the new app list that you have created. And then click save, then go back to the Cloud Flows, and then open up the initial create app items. Before you run the flow, ensure you have the Power Platform admin role and the system administrator security role for the environments you want to get the Power Apps from. You can just run the workflow after this. So for the rest of the video, I will be going through the flow details, explaining each part and why did I do certain things. So to get started, we have the constant again. We have parse JSON as the action. And this time I added a person column template. The person column template is used for the HTTP call to SharePoint to add a column value. I have 2 single quotes because in JSON, 1 single quote means that this is a string. So I need the double single quote to keep 1 single quote. So these will be reduced to 1, these 2, and this. And I also have the app list ID pointing to the apps list environment variable. Then I have initialize a variable for the apps. And then going down here, we're grabbing the connectors list with a top count with 5,000 items. And I turned on a pagination for this. Usually it is a 500 item limit. So we can grab more than 500 items. And then I use the select action to select the columns I really needed, such as connector ID, the ID of the item, and the title. And then moving down here, we're going to grab all the environments that we have. And then I use the select action to select the environment ID, the name, type, and status, and filtering out any environments with the status in disabled. Moving on down, for each environment, we are going to get apps as admin, so it will list all the app details. And then we use the select action to select the properties we really needed. So I grabbed the app ID, the environment ID, environment name, app name, description, the connector references, user, UPN, created date, and last modified date. These are just what I think that could be valuable in a SharePoint list, but you can definitely add more columns. And then inside of that, we have another apply to each. For every app that we have received, from the select action, we are going to check if there is a connection reference. So it's going to check if it has any items in the connector ref property, which we have clearly defined in the select action above. And if it's not empty, then we are going to grab the connector ID. So from the SharePoint connectors, we're going to filter by connector ID from the last action. And then we are going to use the replace statement from what it was filtered. So from the connector lookup template, we are going to replace ID with the string version of the SharePoint ID from the connectors list and replace the title with the actual title that we have placed in SharePoint. And then we are going to send an HTTP request to Office 365 users just to check if the owner's account is still enabled, because in SharePoint, if the user is no longer enabled in Azure or Enter ID, we cannot add that user to a SharePoint column. In this, I am filtering by the user principal name from the owner's UPN and selecting account enabled and the user principal name. And then right below it, we have append to array variable. What I'm doing here is using the apply to each for each app. I am going to add 2 new properties. The first one is called connectors. This is the connectors property value. So this is saying if the lookup column template is empty, then put out an empty string. Else, we are going to join the replace lookup column template with a semicolon and a hashtag. For the second property called owner, if the first array of send an HTTP request values property called account enabled. So account enabled is a Boolean. So if that is true, then replace person column template from the constant UPN with the current items of for each app owner UPN. If the account enabled is null or no users are returning back from the send an HTTP request to Office 365, then return an empty string. After that, this is just a compose to display all of the variable items just for us to see. And then we are going to create the item in SharePoint. So what we have here is change set ID with a GUID, the set URL, adding to the apps list. This is saying add these items, and the form value is the column values. So we have the title, placeholder for that, app ID, and the placeholder for that, and so on for the environment ID, environment name, description, owner, created date, and last modified date, and connectors. I do wanted to point out the owner column is a person column. If you want to send a null person value, it would have to have an open and close square bracket. And then we are going to do a select from the variable apps to replace all of the placeholder from the template add items, such as the title. We are going to replace it with the app name, app ID with app ID, environment ID with environment ID, environment name, description, owner, created date, last modified date, and connectors. And then this is a compose action. Is chunking the last action into 100 items. And then down here for every chunk, which means for every 100 items, batch create those items. And then the join is the items for each chunk with the empty string from an array JSON to a string. And there you have it. I hope this video is helpful. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell icon to follow for more updates.